So I don't see you right now because I have full screen with the presentation, but when I finish my part, I'm disable this sharing the screen so I can see you and we can answer questions. Today we are going to talk about ethics in clinical trials. I'm Gonzalo Díaz Covacho, postdoctoral researcher at the University of Granada. My research is focused on ethics and bioethics, and my colleague Alberto Molina Perez, who is going to talk after me in this webinar, is also a researcher at the University of Granada. Both of us are part of the TTP Guide TX project. First of all, I want to apologize in advance if at any time my screen freezes or I lose my connection because the internet of my faculty is terrible, but hopefully I'm not going to have this problem. This is the presentation index of my talk. First of all, I want to present in a brief way the TTV Guide TX project and our group in ethics. Then we are going to talk a little bit about ethical issues related to clinical trial participation with a focus on the therapeutic misconception. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about clinical relationship models. So the TTB Guide is a consistorium of kidney transplant physicians, clinical virologists, project and clinical trial managers, ethicists, and healthcare industry professionals funded by the European Union. The consistorium aimed to establish a new and innovative tool to quantify the activity of the immune system in kidney transplant recipients, the torquetenovirus. You can find on our website all information about this question with videos and a good guide to what we do. The consistorium of the TTV Guide project includes 19 partners from 7 European countries, and it's coordinated by the Medical University of Vienna, with support from the administrative partner EUTEMA. You can see that we have participants from Spain, the Netherlands, Deutschland, Czech Republic, Austria, and Italy. And the PI of the project is Gregor Bond from the Medical University of Vienna. Our group in Spain, in Granada, is dedicated to ethics, and many people participate in this group, myself and also my colleague Alberto Molina. And this group have been in charge, among other things, of generating an ethical framework for the TTP Guide and helping to resolve ethical conflicts that may have arisen during this year of the project. In addition, our work includes the coordination of the Ethics and Governance Council. There is a group of experts in ethics that oversee reviewing and supervising the actions carried out by the project to verify that there are no ethical problems during its execution. Finally, our group has been responsible for providing information on potential ethical issues that may arise for patients during their participation in clinical trial through videos and podcasts that explain in a simple way what are some of the issues that may be of interest. Some of these issues will be discussed in this webinar. You can find also in the same website, you have here the link, these videos, this podcast, and all information to clarify any question what can arise if you participate in this or in other clinical trials. We have also a frequently asked question about the clinical trial and participation in all the languages of the study participants. Okay, so let's focus on clinical trial and ethical issues related to participation in research in clinical trials. Clinical trials are basically medical research studies in which people participate in some way. A clinical trial is conducted on a group of patients for whom it is believed that a novel treatment or intervention could be beneficial. Typically, patients are divided into two groups, one of which receives standard care and the other an experimental doses. Once the trial is complete, the groups are compared and the investigator analyzes who performed better. A trial is a long and careful process which can last 6 or 7 years, involving usually commonly pharmaceutical companies, authorities, researchers, hospitals, and patients. First, the usual clinical trial procedures are as follows. First, researchers study a new treatment in the laboratory, then in animals. If a treatment shows promise, they test the treatment in human clinical trials. Researchers do this in 3 or 4 phases with different purposes each. It is not always the same process, but commonly this is the procedure of a clinical trial. We can identify different types of clinical trials with humans, and the Pascal Maragall Foundation in 2020 make a good scope, a good analysis of what are the most common trials, clinical trials types. Okay, we have first of all preventive trials. They test new methods to reduce the risk of developing a disease. This implies that they involve healthy people who may or may not be at risk of developing the disease. This is the case of the clinical trial for the prevention of Alzheimer's disease, for example. Diagnostic trials, these focus on identifying new tests or procedures for the diagnostic of a disease. Screening trials, they test methods for early diagnosis of a disease. Treatment trials investigate new therapies, whether drugs, procedures, or surgical techniques to treat a disease, and quality of life trials that study treatment or procedures to improve the quality of life of people with chronic disease, for example. Okay, so in a clinical trial, usually arise ethical problems. We need to conduct the trial respecting the autonomy of the patient, also respecting a different ethics question, and also we need to follow some key points to guide in a correct way these clinical trials. The Harvard Medical School published this paper who identify some key points that are important in this process of a clinical trial. Okay, they identify these ones. First, we need to define the risk in a clinical trial. When thinking about potential risk, we should also consider how serious it might be and how many people might be affected and use existing procedures to reduce this likelihood or harm occurring. For example, if we are concerned that someone may have an allergic reaction to a medication, we can give them an antihistamine beforehand to minimize the risk and administer this medication in a safe place just to respond if some reactions occurs. We also need to select qualified participants. To do this, we need to ensure that the participants have fit in good eligibility criteria in the trial participation. In practice, this means assembling a group that represents the population and include the people who are most in need of such an intervention, but at the same time, we need to manage the risk. We also need to evaluate the potential for the benefit of the trial. We need to understand the desired outcome we hope to achieve, or the research question we need to answer, and why it is important. We need also, of course, to minimizing risk. Studies should follow a sound research design and not expose subjects to unnecessary risk. This means that whenever possible, researchers should manage risk to subject by coordinating with existing medical care. We also, and this is very important, and Alberto is going to talk about that in his part of the webinar, provide a meaningful informed consent process. Everyone participating in a clinical trial should receive an informed consent for explaining all aspects of the study, including potential risk and benefits. Participating in research is always voluntary. Participants should also have the opportunity to ask questions, understand alternative options, and be able to withdraw at any time during the clinical trial process. We must protect vulnerable subjects that include children, pregnant women, and their unborn babies, people with decisional problems, disabled people, and people with some educationally or socially disadvantaged. Investigators should think about their objectives for waiting to use this population and determine whether they can answer the same research question without using any vulnerable subjects. The last thing that we need to do is ensure the transparency of the clinical trial. It is important to have a plan in place to share any adverse outcome or complication that might arise. In addition, as the clinical trial process progresses, if any changes are made to the actual design, such as adding a test, for example, this alteration must again be submitted to the ethics committee for approval. This helps ensure that everyone is on the same page every step of the way. While there are many ethical issues to consider when designing and implementing clinical trials, a well-run effort that takes into account all of these important principles have the potential to greatly benefit large groups of people. Below, we will attempt to explain some of the ethical risks or issues that may arise throughout a clinical trial. Okay, so first of all, we need to know that researchers, investigators, want to contribute to scientific knowledge. The goal of a clinical trial is to better understand what will be most beneficial for future patients. On the other hand, clinicians, meanwhile, want to improve the patient health now. And it is very important that the patient and potential study participant is always perfectly clear who is talking to her, the researcher or the clinician. Otherwise, there is a risk that the potential participant will attribute a therapeutic intent to a clinical investigation, which could ultimately misleading influence her decision to consent. This is what we call therapeutic misconception, and this is what I'm going to talk in the next slide. But first, we need to know, and we take occasion that often the clinician is also the researcher. So this clinician, if he or she acts as clinician, must identify his role, and at the same time, if he or she is going to act as a researcher, he must identify this role, because you have the right to know if he is talking to you as a clinician or is he talking to you as a researcher. Okay, so what is therapeutic misconception? In short, therapeutic misconceptions consist on not appreciating the distinction between the objective of research and the objective of clinical medicine. The goal of a clinical trial is to better understand what will be most beneficial for future patients. Therefore, it is very important that the patient and potential participant in the study is clear who she is talking to, that we talked before. The question is, how to avoid this therapeutic misconception? How to avoid this misconception in general, and in particular context of a clinical trial like the TTV guide? In this webinar, we'll try to offer some recommendations on how to do so. here we can see one of them. Let's see some misconception example. First of all is a misconception in the purpose of the trial. A potential participant may believe that the purpose of the trial is therapeutic, but this is a misconception. The purpose of the test of the trial is to acquire knowledge, not to make some therapy on the patient. Healthcare and medical research are close in some clinical trials, like this one, but they are not the same. In medical care, the primary interest is the health of the patient now. In medical research, the primary interest is to obtain knowledge that will be beneficial for future patients. Another misconception is that a potential participant might believe that he or she is assigned to a particular group, either control or comparison group, based on what is considered best for him or her personally. And that doesn't happen. Participants are randomly assigned to groups. Oh, sorry. You will not be assigned to a group based on what is best for you personally, because nobody knows at this point of the clinical trial what is best for you. The assignment will always be random. And the last one of the three more important misconceptions that can arise in this kind of clinical trial is the expectation of is a potential participant might believe that novel all with experimental intervention are always better than available standard treatment. The expectation of they are going to obtain a therapeutic and novel benefit for the participation on this kind of clinical trial. That is a misconception. In fact, the ongoing study might reveal that the novel intervention performs better, but also worse than the standard one. In any case, participation in a clinical trial would contribute to advancing medical knowledge and could help doctors improve future treatment for transplant patients in the case of our study. Here we have a good paper from the Dr. Jennifer McCormick that identify how we can fight against this therapeutic misconception risk in biomedical research. I think one of the most important things to do is to talk with the patients, to the clinical trial participants, and expose all the possible therapeutic misconceptions that can arise in this kind of trials. If the participant identify these problems at the beginning of the process, they can decide if they want to participate in the trial only for the reason that the trial have, and not for another reason that they are not real. The last thing I want to talk today is about the clinical relationship models. Before I will talk about another important things. We can identify different models, relationship models between the physician and the patients. Okay, and this is important to consider the informed consent, how the clinicians are going to talk with patients, and also how they can take decisions if they involve the patients, if not, if they only communicate some important things, and so on. So we identify four main important relationship model. The first one is the paternalistic model. Oh, sorry. I don't know what I do. Okay. Yeah, well. Okay. The paternalistic model. In the paternalistic model, the healthcare professional assumes a dominant role in decision making, acting as a guardian who prioritizes the patient well-being based on medical expertise. Patient autonomy is not actively considered, as the professional makes choices deemed to be in the best interest of the patient, sometimes even without fully informing them of alternative options This model is often applied in emerging situations where immediate action is necessary and there is little time for shared decision-making. Where this approach ensures swift and decisive medical intervention, it may sometimes undermine patient rights and preferences. The second model is the informative model that emphasizes the patient autonomy by ensuring that they receive all relevant medical information in an objective manner. The healthcare professional provide facts regarding diagnosis, possible treatment, risk, and benefits, but does not guide or influence the patient decision. Still, the patient, armed with the necessary knowledge, independently determines the course of action based on their personal values and preferences. This model is commonly seen in elective procedures and certain chronic disease management scenarios, where patients' choice is paramount. However, its limitation lies in the potential for patients to feel overwhelmed by complex medical data without sufficient guidance. We have also the interpretative model, in which the healthcare professional takes on a more interactive role by acting as a conciliator. Beyond merely providing medical information, the professional helps the patient interpret and understand the implication of various treatment options in the context of their personal values and lifestyle. This collaborative approach ensures that the chosen medical intervention aligns with what is most beneficial to the patient. And the last one, the deliberative model, represents the highest level of patient-professional interaction, where both parties engage in an open and dynamic dialogue to determine the best course of action. The healthcare professional not only provides medical information, but also actively discuss the ethical, personal, and social implications of each option with the patient. This model is a partnership in which the physician helps the patient refine their preferences and values to make an informed and morally sound decision. Each clinical relationship model offers distinct advantages and is applicable in different healthcare contexts. But in short, these are the four main important clinical relationship models. That's all from my part, and now Alberto can talk a little bit for another ethical problem. I stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Do you hear me? Gonzalo,
Yeah.
do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So as Gonzalo said earlier, I'm Alberto Molina. I'm here a researcher and professor at the University of Granada. So after what Gonzalo said, it's important to just clarify a little bit what is informed consent. I guess you already know a lot about this, but just to clarify a little things, and if you have questions, you can ask them in the chat, and we will then address your questions. So the question of informed consent starts after the Second World War because of what the German doctors did, which was doing research on patients against their will. And even after that, other doctors, including in United States or France or the United Kingdom or other countries, continued doing research without the full awareness and consent of patients. So little by little, the medical community and bioethicists started to point to the fact that this is not ethical, and things started changing. And we started asking for consent, giving information, having ethics committees to review these documents of informed consent, etc. So we are moving little by little from what Gonzalo explained about the paternalistic model, where doctors thought they were doing the right thing and they had the knowledge, and because they had the knowledge, they had the authority to make decisions on behalf of other people without necessarily asking for the consent or giving them the information, because they thought that the right thing to do according to their own knowledge and medical authority. So we are moving from a paternalistic model to a deliberative model, little by little. And all this is based on the idea of autonomy. We are autonomous, but what does that mean? There are at least two ways to understand autonomy. One is like a property. When we are born as human beings, we are free and we have some dignity. And that's something that in the human rights, we should have the right to make our own decisions. However, some people are more able to make decisions than others. And there's another interpretation of autonomy, which is a capacity, a competence that we can have more or less, and we can develop. Little children have less autonomy than adults. So when they grew up, they learn to make decisions, to have the relevant information, and to know what's their best interest, what are the consequences of decisions, and they acquire more autonomy. So both conceptions of autonomy are important and are the basis of the informed consent process. The first one is because we have a human right that nobody can take from us, which is to make our own decisions about our life, with our own values and interests. And the other one is that we don't have the same capacity to make decisions in every context. We can have more facility or more difficulty to understand some things. And therefore, the communication with the clinicians must acknowledge this situation. The communication from the clinicians must depend on the patient and its actual capacity to understand things. And when we talk about informed consent and autonomy, this doesn't mean that the clinician gives the information and then the patient decides, which is the informative model. It's more in the deliberative model that Gonzalo described. It's a dialogue. Patients and doctors must dialogue, so the patient all the questions necessary, and the doctor must make sure that the patient is understanding everything and has the relevant information. Without this process of communication on two ways, we cannot have a full informed consent. And this can include also relatives. You don't have to make the decision on your own as a patient. You can consult your family, your friends, and think about the things about before making the decisions. I'm sorry, I have the flu. I'm very tired, so I hope I'm not very fluid in my communication, but so I'm sorry. So it's important to know that the informed consent in research, clinical research, is a process of information where the clinician must provide all the relevant facts, both before and during the trial, before acceptation and once you have accepted, you can still ask questions, and it's important. If you have worries, doubts, you must ask questions, and the doctors have the duty to answer fully your questions. And it's also something that must be voluntary, which means that there are no pressures. You must not feel pressured by the clinician, by the family, by anyone. You must accept and consent to participate only because you want, not because you think you should, or people are asking you to do that, or you have some duty to do so. It's only your responsibility and based on your willingness, without any constraint. And you must be fully aware of what are the implications. So we talk about informed consent. The consent is when you say that you want to participate, but this consent, in order to be valid, must be fully informed. And that's the most important thing to understand here, is this process of communication. You must have full awareness of the benefits, the positive and negative consequences, all that implies. And this is all along your participation, is not limited to before you say yes or you sign a paper. And it's very important that the information given to you is comprehensible. And the clinician should also ask you questions to be sure that you understand. This is not necessarily the case. And you can have situations, maybe you had this experience. I had the experience of someone giving me something, a paper to sign, and signing that I give my consent, my informed consent. I said, but can you let me read the paper before? And it resulted that this was just the paper for consent, but the information was in another paper, and nobody talked to me to explain anything. That's not valid. Even if I sign this paper, that should have no value because I have not been informed. And if what is written in this paper or what the person explains to me is not made in a way that is easy to understand, according to my background, to my education, to my native language, whatever, if it's not comprehensible, the consent is not valid. And the consent can be oral or written or both, and the communication also should be both written and oral. You should have time to read the things, to think about it, and not pressured to make a decision on the spot immediately. No, can I take this paper, go home, read it carefully, read it several times if I need, then discuss it with my loved ones, and then ask every question I need before saying yes and signing. And it's something very, very important to understand is that the consent is not only given the moment you say yes or you sign. It's during all the time of your participation in the clinical trial. You can withdraw your consent at any moment. And there should be no consequences. You are free to say, okay, I signed this paper, but I no longer willing to continue this, and without any consequences or bad consequences for you. If you are receiving a treatment, you should receive the same treatment. If you are in experimental thing, you will not be in the experiment anymore. But if you need some treatment that you received before, you should have the same treatment, etc. So it's something that doesn't finish at the moment you sign the paper. It's until the end of the trial. At any moment, you can ask questions, you can express your doubts, your worries, and you can say, I don't want to continue anymore. That's your right, and it's absolutely okay to do that. So, and I guess it's the most important things to clarify. I think you already knew most of this, and if you have any questions, please ask in the chat. Someone before asked a question that we received by email, which is what to do when. So I guess it's a clinician, how to make superiors accept the unwillingness of participants. That's a very important question. So when the clinicians participate in clinical trials, it's important to recruit patients so that the clinical trial can work, and they need a minimum number of patients. And it's not good news that patients do not accept to participate, or they withdraw their consent and they leave the trial. So on their side, the clinicians might feel some pressure to recruit patients, and they might feel this pressure from their superiors. But both from the patients and the recruiters, is very important to be clear that if there are pressures, if the participation is not fully voluntary, if the patients are not told all the information, or if you don't clarify that participating in a clinical trial is not necessarily receiving the best treatment, as Gonzalo explained about the therapeutic misconception, that's not ethically acceptable. And this can, for the superiors, this can bring problems, including legal problems. So the paternalistic model of medicine, which is the historical traditional model, had done very bad things. And we are moving from this model to a more ethical model, where we acknowledge the autonomy, the freedom, the dignity of the patients, and their right, their fundamental right, not to accept to participate because of whatever reasons. You don't have to think that they are not making the right decision for themselves, or you know better. No, they have the right to know what's best for them, including if you don't agree with that. And so for the superiors, tell them to speak with the ethics committee of the hospital, for instance, or with any bioethicist, for them to understand the importance of the voluntary and full awareness and freedom of participants to consent or not consent, or withdraw consent after participating and signing papers. I see So I read one question in the chat. How is the ethics community engaging with both the kidney transplant patient community and the pharmaceutical industry? Have you considered having a meeting with these two groups together? Having meetings with these groups together, I don't know. I'm not aware here of doing this, but the ethics community is very, very involved with the issue of ethics of the pharmaceutical industry, to point out all the ethical problems, and now there's also a trend, a movement, I don't know how to call it, of patient involvement. So it's when we are moving from the paternalistic model, we first acknowledge that we need consent, we need that the consent is informed, but now we are trying to do something more and go even beyond the deliberative model that Gonzalo described before, which is the patient engagement model, where not only patients are recruited and informed and they give full consent, but they participate in the design of the studies and during the studies. So like a peer with the clinicians, because the patients know better than the clinicians what's best for them, what are their worries, what are their interests, and this should be included by design in the clinical trials. And that's a slow process. The European Union, for instance, is pushing this, but so people have to integrate that, and it's not easy when you are used to make as a researcher, as a clinician, you design the study on your own without dialogue with the patients, and you incorporate the patients after that. So now it's starting to change, and the habits have to change, and little by little, it's not only, I don't know if I'm answering your question, because it's not only the ethics community, is clinicians, ethicians, the institutions who pay, who fund the studies are working together for more public and patient engagement. And I don't know how the pharmaceutical industry is included in this equation, but I don't know if you want to ask another question. I see raised hand. Yeah, I allow you. Are you going to speak? I guess you can speak now.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to speak. I think I'm involved with I work with different companies on a consulting basis. I'm also a kidney transplant recipient, but what I see from my experience is that there's just a lot more dialogue needed between those two groups, between the pharmaceutical industry and the patient community, because I think a lot of these concepts that you're talking about, I agree with them, but in reality, they're not being practiced. And so, just thinking ahead now to xenotransplantation and some of these other areas that there's an element of risk, I think it's now more important than ever that these groups are together. Because what you said there about therapeutic the misconception of therapeutic benefit. So many patients think, well, if I'm not in that arm, the active arm, they immediately assume they're going to get some benefit from that. And so anyway, I'm just saying is that I think that there's a big chasm between what you're saying and what's happening in reality. So
yes, yeah, sure. So I know by experience that is not fully practiced how it should be, because for the clinicians and even if not only in the biomedical field but in research in general, ethics is often seen by researchers as an obstacle, as paperwork, so you don't let them do the stuff they think it's good and there's no problem with it, because they are not aware of the potential problems. They don't have the training to do that.
right.
But yeah.
No, and I think what you were saying earlier too is that I think what I see a lot of times happening is that these researchers or these companies are under pressure, but they then respond to things with pressure because they've never invested in the proper way of doing it, right?
Yeah.
It's that they have poor strategies, and then they get into these situations where there's just this panic because they're doing it poorly.
Yes. So there you have the responsibility of the institutions who fund the research to, and I know the European Union is doing that, so that the people doing the research are more aware of the ethical issues and requirements. And maybe that's not already the case, but maybe they will push for training about ethics. And things are changing little by little. For instance, when we talk about the pharmaceutical industry, before it was not necessary to register all the clinical trials. So you have some molecule that you think is going to work, and you do the trial, and you don't have good results. So what do? You just don't publish, and you try again. You don't publish if it doesn't work until it works. And maybe if you try 100 times and it fails 99 times, and just one time it's working, and you publish that and you say, I have proof that this drug is working. That's not true. And now you cannot do that anymore, at least theoretically, because the industry and all researchers must pre-register their studies. Before they start, they say, I am going to do this, and I have the duty to publish the results, whether good, positive results or negative results. And that's better. That's better for patients, that's better for everyone. But it's hard, and we have to move step by step. I don't know if I answered.
You did. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there more questions? Is anyone willing to ask something? If not, so Gonzalo, do you want to add something?
No. Thanks to everybody to join us in this webinar. And that's all for my part.
Okay, yeah, we can close this. And I don't know if you had with the link to join the information about us, and if our emails, if you want to contact us anyway. Oh. And thank you, Lydia. I will write in the event chat my email. So
yeah, me too.
if anyone wants to ask questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice day.